And I'm just going to quickly share my screen, so just bear with me. All righty, we should be all set now. So as I mentioned, my name is Laura Malone. I am the Development Officer here for Community Foundation of Lorain County. Myself and Allison Hawkinson, our Finance Manager, and Jim Stobie, our Chief Financial Officer, will be doing today's presentation. And as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about the endowments and some policy changes that are going on, as well as some updates with fundraising and initiatives that we can do to help you and your endowments grow and go through the different processes. So we will be talking through those. We'll allow questions at various points of the presentation, so feel free to jump in whenever those question opportunities arise, and we're happy to talk through those as a group. This presentation is being recorded, and we also will be sharing that, as well as some other pieces of information and a survey after today's presentation. Probably tomorrow, you should have that information for this group, as well as those that participated in last week's presentation will also get that information tomorrow as well. Just a little bit of what we're going to be covering. I'm going to start things off with a background on the school endowments and the community foundation and how those tie together. Allison's going to talk about requesting grants and accessing fund information. Jim's going to talk about the fundraising policy and some of the do's and don'ts. And then we'll come back around to talking about some of the fundraising and planned giving ideas and methods. And then hopefully have a little bit of an open forum to share best practice ideas on how to help you grow the endowments and any questions that you may have. And next steps of what you'd like to see in how Community Foundation can best assist all of you in the future as we go forward in this process. We're looking at this being kind of our first step of really deepening and broadening those relationships with the school endowments. So many of you may know, some of you may not, that the Lorain City Schools had created the first school endowment fund in 1983. That was actually one of the first school endowments ever created in the country. In 1985, Community Foundation of Lorain County was instrumental in legislation that was proposed to the state of Ohio, allowing the schools to deposit a portion of their operating budget into an endowed fund for future support. So the Community Foundation really was one of the early pioneers in the creation of school endowment funds, envisioning that the partnerships with local school districts and their communities would build permanent endowments to provide added educational value to local students. Currently, at this point in time, the Community Foundation serves 18 school districts in the management of 129 various endowments, totaling over $16 million. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's allocated in just a moment. As many of you know, distributions from the school endowments enable the teachers and the school districts of Lorain County to access dollars to support programs that directly benefit students. This can be in the form of teacher grants, artists in residence, field trips, camping trips, scholarships. My husband is a graduate of Firelands, and my sister-in-law teaches at North Ridgeville. So I've seen how some of these endowments can play out and benefit the students of the community firsthand. Jim and Allison will share their relationships to the Avon Lake school districts. So it's great to be able to be part of this and be able to help to drive the momentum with these endowments. A lot of these endowments can take different shapes and forms. So as you see, there's a wide variety of numbers of different sizes or numbers of funds in each endowment. In some cases, these are singular endowments where it's just one single bucket of dollars that is servicing the school district. In other cases, there are just one or two allocated buckets. For instance, Avon Lake Schools has their own school endowment fund, and then their Fine Arts Endowment Fund, and those are their two primary. Midview Schools has about 6 that focus on key areas like academics, athletics, capital expenditures, fine arts, their general endowment, and scholarships. But then also you'll see some of the other school districts like Amherst or Firelands or Wellington that have their own scholarship funds that are embedded in with those endowments as well. And that's why you see some of those have those larger numbers of funds as part of their profiles. Some of those have been endowments created by school alumni or parents that have a strong affinity for the school district. Some of those have been created as estate gifts or legacy gifts. Some of them have been created because there's just been a long-standing affinity for a relationship to that school district. So there's a lot of different reasons why those may get created. The emphasis on why it's an endowment is, what we refer to as the power of endowment. And most of you have endowment funds that vary in size, but I wanted to use the benchmark of about $100,000 and just looking at that as being the threshold of where that endowment is today. And if that organization or that school district adds $10,000 a year to that endowment, the growth that can achieve over that 25 to 50 year benchmark. So if we look in this scenario, we have the idea that the fund started at $100,000. There was $10,000 that was added annually. Within that first 25 years, there was over $262,000 that was distributed back to the school district, either in the form of scholarships or teacher grants or school activities. But over $262,000 went back to the district through their annual distributions over that 25-year period. That being said, that school district still has an investable balance, money that's still in their account, of over $400,000. In this case, we're looking at $403,000 as their investment balance. Flash forward another 25 years to year 50, and in that time, the school has received back over $919,000 in cumulative distributions that have come to them based upon their annual distribution percentage. That has once again been scholarships or teacher grants or other activities that the school has embarked upon. But that being said, there's still that significant investment balance that is staying behind. In this case, it's just under $800,000. That is still money that is in the investment account for that forever funding, as I like to call it with the endowment. So that money is there forever to be able to support the schools and the school districts and the teachers and the students with their needs and help provide that supplemental funding to aid the school districts in wherever they may need or choose to allocate those dollars. So I want to take a pause here before Allison starts with her portion of the presentation and see if there's just any general questions from an endowment standpoint. I'm not sure how many of the folks here might be newer to their position, but I'm happy to take a pause and see if there's any questions. All right, we will go ahead then and move on. Allison, would you like to start with your portion of the presentation?
Yeah, definitely. Once again, my name is Allison Hawkinson. I am the finance manager here at the Community Foundation. Been here almost a year and a half now. I am also on the board of trustees for the Avon Lake City Schools Foundation. I have 4 kids and 2 have graduated from Avon Lake City Schools and 2 are at the high school now. So working with the school foundation is definitely something that is very important to me. And so this work is just, it's near and dear to my heart. So as Laura mentioned, every district in Lorain County does have at least one fund here at the foundation. And just as most of you know, each district can access their funds through our website, peoplewhocare.org. You just click on the fund holders in the upper right-hand corner, and they'll take you right to the login screen. Generally, we recommend that the district superintendent and either the endowment fund president or treasurer have access to their funds online. And then once you're logged in, you can see all the activity, look at your statements, and for all of your various funds. The monthly statements are there, usually by the end of the month or the end of the following month. And then each year in February, we will print out an annual statement and mail it out to you. So if you ever have any trouble accessing the portal, navigating through it, reading your statement, please feel free to reach out to any of us here at the foundation. We're all happy to help you navigate through that anytime. So, all right, next slide. Next, we wanted to touch on the available to spend distributions. This is calculated in January of each year by multiplying our spending rate by the 12-quarter trailing average balance of each fund. The last few years, our spending rate has been 4.5%, and it is approved annually by our board. A form is then sent out to the superintendent and a copy to each of everybody that's authorized to make distribution requests. And the options on that form are either to distribute, hold, or reinvest. So next slide. So let's talk about those three different options, because that's something that many people tend to have a lot of questions on. So the first one is distribute. If you choose distribute, a check is cut for the entire amount, and we will mail that to the school for your grants and scholarships. If you choose to hold, the spending allocation remains in the available to spend category until it is then needed for your grants and scholarships. If you choose to reinvest, then your spending allocation is put back into principal and it is held there, for future use. Please note that you can use any combination of those three. It doesn't have to be one specific one. You can do any of the three. And there's no really time deadline on responding. The default is to hold. Another question that we get is, if you do leave it in the spendable, does your balance, the amount that's sitting in the available to spend, does that continue to earn investment earnings? And the answer is yes, it does. Any of the earnings, though, do go back into the principal. So wanted you guys to be aware of that. Another thing to think about is different ways of using the three different buckets. If you have a big project that is coming up, and let's say it's going to be a $15,000 project, and your available to spend each year is around $5,000. Well, you could let that accumulate for a few years, and then on that third year, distribute, and then you'd have the 15,000 built up over the few years, and then distribute it. So just some different ways to think about how you use those three different buckets. So, all right, next slide. So if you do choose to hold, when it's time to then request the money for distribution, you will need to fill out the grant payment request voucher. One thing that's really important as you're filling this out is, as we mentioned before, most of the districts have more than one fund. It is really important that you get the right name of the fund in here. So whether it's your general main endowment, fine arts, or any of the other different funds, just make sure you have the right fund in there. And then once you have it completed, you can either email it to us or send it in the mail, and we will process that for you. So, any questions on this?
Thanks, Allison.
Sure.
Laura, can you hit the next slide?
Yep.
All right, so I'll give a quick introduction myself. So I'm Jim Stobie. I've been the CFO at the foundation here since August of 2019, and tackled quite a few different things as I was kind of getting my brain wrapped around all the various things we do in the community. And school endowments was one of the things that was kind of near and dear to me as well. I also involved with the schools from a standpoint of, I'm the Board of Education president for Avon Lake. And actually prior to doing that, I had interest in becoming a school treasurer. So about 10 years ago, I investigated and obtained a school treasurer's license, and then determined that wasn't for me. So I've seen some of the school finance angles both from a local district standpoint and from a treasurer standpoint, and then come to the foundation. It made me aware that there were quite a few rules and regulations that govern how funds work. So we're going to get into a few things today, but the genesis of my part of the presentation was essentially that we've had some documentation in the past, and I guess at various points in time, the school endowments have congregated to some level, but we had not had that touch point in a while. And I know I really felt like we needed to do a little bit of a refresh with our legal counsel just to kind of go over what we were doing and what the schools are doing, endowments are doing, and make sure that we were all on the same page. So at the Community Foundation, we have access to legal counsel through Philanthropy Ohio, and they helped take a look at everything that we were doing and helped update some of the documents that Laura sent out to you prior to this presentation. And those are very lengthy documents with a lot of information. And I've only got a few minutes to talk here, so I'm going to try and really give the abridged version of this and recognize that we'll have some time for questions after I'm done. But if you guys need to touch base with me offline or else, and we'd be happy to do so. Let's hit the next slide. The first thing I want to tackle was a little bit of the relationship between, there's really kind of like 3 points of the triangle here. We have the school treasurer, we have the endowment board, and we have the community foundation. And I wanted to touch on how all those three interact. From a school treasurer and endowment board relationship standpoint, and I've seen this as a school board member, just keep in mind that the school treasurers are responsible for a lot of different types of funds. Obviously, we think of the main operating fund and some of the ones that run the operations of the schools, but the treasurers are also responsible for many of the other activity-based funds that fall under the domain where they don't necessarily have much interaction with. So have that perspective that your school treasurer isn't dealing with your school endowment at the same level as they might do the operating fund, but they're under the same scrutiny. And I know seeing what the state auditors look at, there has been a lot of scrutiny in the past few years that school organizations are following the right rules. And we really just want to make sure that there's no missteps in communication so that the schools aren't put in a bad light by something that might be done by the school endowments. So really I guess the key takeaway is to make sure that there's clear communication between the school endowment boards with the treasurer on things like grants and annual distributions and fundraising and so forth. And we'll get into that a little bit further. Next slide. So from a standpoint of the Community Foundation and the Endowment Board, and we're going to talk about this from a couple of perspectives, but keep in mind that because the Community Foundation is essentially the holding point of these funds, when someone is out there doing fundraising on behalf of the Community Foundation, they are really acting on behalf of the Community Foundation, even though it's a school endowment activity. So these volunteer efforts are basically generating what hope to be nice, sizable donations, which the Community Foundation is authorizing as a tax-exempt status as a charitable gift for those who are making those. So we as the Community Foundation have a primary interest to make sure that the fundraising activities are legal, they're done positively, and fall within all the stuff that we're going to talk about today. Next slide. So, and I didn't want to take us down a rabbit hole here, but I did want to bring this up because I think this is something that many organizations in the schools, not just school endowments, wrestle with a little bit. From a standpoint of, if your endowment is very active in fundraising and wants to maintain a separate checking account to that level of detail, this is where you might consider creating a separate 501c3 for the school endowment. I know Avon Lake's considering that and going through that process right now. That said, so why would you want to do that potentially? Again, if you want to have that checking account where you're making some of the transactions versus flowing things through the school foundation, you would be able to do that. But keep in mind, if you go through that extra step, the 501c3 needs to be approved by the local school board. There's filing requirements. There's definitely some legal regulations from both the state and federal level. So it's not just hey, we'll just create this and this will be easy. I know we've seen it from an Avon Lake perspective, not necessarily in the school endowment, but one of our larger camp funds went through this process a few years ago. So I wanted to bring it up as a notion of something to consider based on how your operations work, but you know, it's something for future conversations as you go through with your endowment committee. Next slide. So, so what are the responsibilities of the Community Foundation when it comes to fundraising? And this is under the traditional ways that you guys have been raising money. So our role is to manage the money and property and accept it in from the donors and then apply it properly into the right accounts. And just from a standpoint of what happens, we process donations every week. So in the months of like November and December, we're getting a lot of donations. Some of the months now are maybe not as much, but we take the donations in, we make sure that they're applied properly, and then we provide proper acknowledgements to donors for their tax exempt donations. Next slide. So from the endowment board perspective, and this is where this is not necessarily a change, but maybe a little bit more role emphasis from what we've done in the past. When we talk with our legal counsel about best practices and what we should be doing, one of the things that really fleshed out of this was that if you are doing large-scale fundraising activities where you're doing an event, you really should obtain authorization from the Community Foundation in advance of that event. Now, of course, we are going to be 100% supportive as long as it's an activity that falls within the necessary guidelines and proper events. So as the fundraising responsibilities go, you're going to be expected to maintain the accurate and complete accounting of all the incomes and expenses, including the ticket sales, any kind of cash gifts. If you're doing any kind of special events that might have specific laws like gaming laws, you want to make sure you pay attention to those. And also keep in mind things like if you're doing it at a particular place, you want to make sure you have insurance or licensing in place to make sure that the event is run properly. And you know, this is not only for the protection of the endowment board, but also the protection of the Community Foundation. Next slide. So one of the questions we get, which is kind of a silly question, but it's an important one, is so how do I make my checks out, or how do I accept gifts? Well, what we thought we would just say is clarify the way that we would like to see the gifts sent to us, understanding that maybe everyone won't necessarily follow those directions. But the proper way to make a donation to your school endowments is to actually have the check payable to the Community Foundation of Lorraine County with the name of the memo fund, name of the fund in the memo field. And then you can send it directly to the Community Foundation, or you can actually go online and do an online donation. That said, if somebody writes us a check to the Avon Lake School Endowment Fund, we'll still be able to cash it. But from a proper legal perspective, that's really how the check should be written. Except with when those donations come in, we will process them timely, as I mentioned, and then we will send a gift acknowledgement letter to that individual indicating the gift is tax deductible as permitted by law. And if you are going to be out trying to fundraise or get sponsorships from third party, local businesses and so forth, we would ask you then to solicit use of our EIN number, because most likely those organizations are going to ask for the Community Foundation's federal EIN number to be able to get when they're writing their checks. So that's going to be part of the package of information that we're going to go through in a minute. Next slide. So I did the express pass of the of the do's and don'ts as kind of laid out in our fundraising documents, but essentially the few takeaways that we have for you today is I'm going to go a little out of order. The third bullet point, there were a couple documents that were provided for this webinar, and the one was very specific with asking for or laying out all the kind of the do's and don'ts within a acknowledgement form. What we decided we should do as a best practice is to have this document, which we would like both the school treasurer and the endowment board chair to review. And then we have not sent this out yet, but we will ask you to sign an acknowledgement form just to basically say that you've read through our policies, you've read through our procedures, you agree to follow them, and we'll do this annually. The second piece of this is, again, if you're going to be going out and doing fundraising to third parties or asking other organizations, which would require using our EIN number, we would like you to request that formally, and that's part of the documents that we sent out. And then lastly, we would like that one of the things that we've really taken a lot of time in the past couple of months is to make sure that we have the proper contacts from a school treasurer and endowment board leadership standpoint to make sure that we are reaching the right people. That said, we understand school treasurers move on, endowment board leadership changes because maybe kids graduate and new folks join. So we would really like to be updated so that our contact lists are up to date. And here's an example, you know, when we get these annual distribution funds, you know, we've calculated how much money is available to spend. We want to make sure that the right people get that information and can act on it timely. And so if you go through any kind of changes in your district, if you could let us know so that we can make sure that we update our systems accordingly. So long story short, I appreciate that we're maybe adding a little bit more complexity from a standpoint of what we're asking you to do when it comes to fundraising, but it really is for the protection of everyone. We want the school districts to be in a good light. We want the endowments to be a good light, and we need to make sure that we're following the proper rules. So with that, I'll pause and see if we have any questions.
And feel free if you have any questions to just jump in. I'm not able to see everybody all at once on my screen. So, you know, feel free to just chime in if there's something that you have a question about.
This is Daryl Edwards. I just wanted to appreciate what you're doing because I've been on our endowment group for 20 years, and we've often had questions which didn't have the specific answers. So I appreciate getting the information, being able now to actually point to certain things. In the past, we've tried, you know, whose EIN we can use, the schools or this, and didn't quite have resolution on. So now you're really providing the information that we need. So I appreciate that. The other thing I would like is there's a lot of information, and then there's a lot of members at the Community Foundation of being able to know when we have a question or a form, who do we send it to specifically, or if everybody could do everybody else's, you know, forwarding, that's okay.
Yeah, Allison and I are, you know, tag team these things. There are some people reach out to her, some people reach out to me. Either one of us are interchangeable, and we're going to talk about anything and get back to them. And I can say in the last year and a half, we've probably had 3 or 4 different endowment boards who have scheduled one-on-one meetings with us, and that's completely fine. If there's you listen to things today or you see things in the presentations you're still not comfortable, we'd be happy to spend that extra time with you. And if it's something that we can't answer, we'll go back to our legal counsel and get that clarification. But the last thing we want someone to do is to feel like they want to put on an event, but they don't know how, because at the end of the day, we're all about trying to grow these endowments so that we can return more money back into the community. And so that's one of the reasons why we're trying to start to get this group and get some inertia. And thank you for recognizing that this is a good thing, not a bad thing, that we're trying to share these rules, even though I do feel like I'm the bad cop today. So
Any other questions or comments? And then, Jim, I think we had talked about in the last session that we are anticipating this type of a review with these pieces maybe being done on an annual level, because there is a little bit of fluidity that may change as governance changes and different things like that, that we want to have more proactive discussions about those events as they occur, correct?
yeah, and it's much easier now that we did the full legal review to just say, hey, legal counsel, has anything changed in the last year? This is the update. And then we can then go back to the schools and say, here's what's changed in the last year. So that's why, you know, after this webinar, we'll eventually be following up with an acknowledgement form for you guys to sign after you've read this. And then we'll likely do that process annually within the cycle of when the school endowments meet. All right, Laura, why don't we tackle the next section so we can get through this before our time runs out?
Sounds good. So thank you, everybody, for your attention so far. My role as the development officer is to primarily help you guys with this growth and how do we go about doing that. So, we talked earlier about the idea that the school endowments can deposit a portion of their operating budget into an endowed fund for future support. But it's also extremely common for the districts to grow their endowment funds through other ways. They may ask parents or community members to make gifts of cash. They may ask the teachers to participate or the other staff members of the district to participate in payroll deduction. The one thing I just wanted to make sure everybody realized is that that is really barely the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of different ways that the organizations can grow their endowments, that the districts can grow their endowments. And it's one of those things that the more that the districts, talk about these things, the easier it becomes for the parents or the teachers or the community leaders to really begin to take on this information and process it and really look at these as giving opportunities. So primarily, aside from the gifts of cash, if you look at the box to the left, we have the idea of gifts of stock. So this is something that we've seen one or two of the school districts talk about on their websites already, about how somebody can make a gift of their IBM stock or their Apple stock or their various types of stock assets to the endowments, to the districts for their endowments. The idea of charitable distributions from IRAs. There is a provision that's been permanently created within the tax code or within the codes for IRAs, that those folks that are over 70 and a half years old can do what they call a charitable rollover, where they can take that money directly out of their IRA, give it to a charity, in this case being the school district's endowment, and not claim that money as income the way they would if they were to just take their regular required minimum distribution. So that's a great opportunity to be able to tap into some of the parents of the alumni that are still in contact with the school, that are still active with the school. Bequests, we had a school district towards the end of last year that they reached out to us because they had a donor that wanted to look at how she could leave the proceeds from her house to the school district. Her intention was that when she passes away, her house be sold and those proceeds get added to the school's endowment fund. So that was one of the conversations that we had. Also, too, along with just the general naming in their estate plans and their wills, the idea of the beneficiary designations. So sometimes, going back to the idea of the IRAs, sometimes those are great for the people while they're alive, but they're not always the best gifts to pass down to their heirs. So being able to name the school endowments as the beneficiary designations of their retirement plans or their life insurance could be an avenue where the endowments can grow quite substantially with those types of gifts. The other things that we do as an ad hoc benefit to the districts is helping to facilitate what I refer to as complex gifts. So these are gifts of personal property, real estate, farmland, crops, life insurance. This can be some of those strategies that combine the benefit of giving plus the benefit of income with the donor in the form of charitable gift annuities or charitable remainder trusts or charitable life estates, where there can still be the donor getting some kind of personal benefit, but then ultimately there being a charitable component built into that. And those are activities that we actually, as part of our commitment to you, would help you facilitate. We would take on that upfront legal cost and expenditure. We would take on that initial liability and risk in evaluating those assets, accepting those assets, liquidating those assets, and then putting those proceeds into the school endowment funds. So those are great avenues to explore as ways to grow the endowments. But as we've talked about, the idea of those types of gifts is not something that is top of mind with donors. I would imagine if a lot of those pieces on that previous slide were news to you, then they're probably definitely news to your donors or to your parents or to your other community leaders that you collaborate with. So how are you putting this stuff in your messaging? How are you creating, those ideas and planting those seeds in your school district and in the media that you put out to the parents and the other community leaders and the teachers within the district? So if you think about, there's an old marketing adage about the rule of 7, in the sense that somebody needs to see or hear a message at least 7 times before they take action. With all the noise of the digital age, it probably takes more than that. But think about how you're positioning these things in your website. Is your endowment easy to find? Looking through some of the websites of the different school districts, in some cases, it was right out there, bold as anything. In other instances, you really had to dig and hunt and peck to try and find that information. What kind of social media are you doing? What kind of information are you sharing on, social media sites or on your main sites? How are you telling the stories in your newsletters? What kind of stories are you sharing? Is it something that's being mentioned early and often in the newsletters? Are there other workshops that you could create, either for your teachers or the community or the parent-teacher organizations, or some of the other avenues to share guidance? The Community Foundation is happy to help participate in some of those. Recognition events. How are you making a big deal about the grant making that you're doing or the scholarships that you're giving? I know some of the school districts will have a teacher recognition event when they're giving the grants to the teachers to be able to use in their classrooms, or they may have their own scholarship event to recognize the students receiving the scholarships. How are you shouting that from the rooftop so that everybody in the school district is aware that these events are happening? Sharing personal letters from donors, from teachers, from students, from other grant recipients, that people can relate to learn about how those dollars have helped make a difference. I know, as I mentioned, my sister-in-law is a teacher in North Ridgeville. She's often used the grants to create certain avenues or certain elements of her classroom that help to enrich what's going on with her students, and has always been thrilled to be able to have that experience and that exposure to be able to help her students. Brochures. Some school districts have brochures that they've created. The Community Foundation has a stock template for brochures that we can work with you to create, and are able to provide, a limited print quantity for the school districts at our own cost. And that's variable depending on 2 different types of brochures that we have, but we're happy to help facilitate those for you and help in that process. Think about the storytelling with that messaging. What are you sharing? Just kind of sharing some of the best practices that I've seen. And, forgive me if there's a school district that I'm overlooking here that has something really cool, and maybe you can share that in the best practices coming up next. But Amherst Schools has a great video about the history of their Amherst Schools Endowment Fund. Oberlin Schools just had a recent article in the paper about a crockpot grant that they had, where the endowment paid for the teacher to go out and distribute crock pots to some of the families in Oberlin to make meal planning easier for them. Midview had a campaign that they did over the holidays a year or 2 ago about, what do you get the person who has everything? Make a gift in their name to the Midview Endowment. North Ridgeville lists on their website the types of grants that were awarded to the teachers and what those monies went towards. Sheffield Lake was one of the schools, Sheffield Lake was one of the schools that talked about the gifts of stock, the different types of gifts beyond cash that can be achieved. Maybe you boil it down to a return on investment type of discussion. If somebody adds $50 to your endowment, or $100 to your endowment, or $250, what does that equate to in the sense of, impact that's going on in a classroom? How can that be relatable to your constituents and your parents and your teachers and your community leaders to inspire them to be more engaged and do more within the endowment and supporting those efforts? I want to quickly open it up to the group and see if there's any best practices that they would like to share, maybe what's worked for them so far, whether it be an event or a mail campaign or collaborations with restaurants, or maybe other things that they have done that they have found to be really successful. Would anybody like to share that info? All righty. Well, hopefully if you have something that you think about, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to share that in future communications. As we go through kind of wrapping things up and going into the idea of some more questions that you may have, what do you want to see as next steps? We want to help you. Jim and Allison and Cindy and myself, we are focused on trying to help create growth in this space and help the districts. We know that finances from a state perspective and a county perspective sometimes get worse instead of better. So this is a great way to be able to help support the schools and help create those opportunities for the students and the teachers and the district overall. So how would you like to see this move forward? Would you like to schedule, have this type of meeting be something that recurs, not just annually from a technical standpoint like Jim and Allison were talking about, but maybe even quarterly from a fundraising standpoint or a best practices standpoint? Are there things that you want to have us create as content that we can push out to your parents and teachers and community leaders about your endowment? Is there planned giving education that you would like to see either at your board level or at the parent teacher association level or at the community level about ways that your endowment can be supported? We're open to any other thoughts or considerations that you may have as a way to best create more growth and more opportunity that can trickle down to the students and to the teachers and to the district overall to help you guys do the work that is so valuable to the community. Did anybody have any questions so far?
This is Daryl again. I guess not so much a question, but an observation. Before, when you were asking about best practices, I was thinking more of, well, what has not worked for you? Taking the opposite, because we tend to have things that don't work more often than things that do.
Is there something in particular that comes to mind that you want to share, Daryl?
Well, some of the restaurants we've tried, we've had good luck with, and some we don't. It's just that's because that's always like an easy way to go, because you're not investing much time and energy. You're really generosity of the restaurants. But we tried one at the Melt, and that didn't work at all. So you just can't predict exactly what's going on and what has. It's just more a matter of what doesn't work all the time is good to know too.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. And there's also times, there's a lot of things that a lot of the school districts have in common. There's also a lot of ways that they're different. So, the things that may work for one group and be a success story may not be a success story for the other group. We have some schools that do a great mail campaign. I started in September of last year, and, towards the end of last year, there was a plethora of envelopes coming in from certain school districts. But I think a lot of that has been, years of cultivation to get to that point where there's thousands of dollars that come in through those mail campaigns. Some of it is not an overnight fix, or is not as quick and easy as you alluded to the restaurants. So, but I think there's a lot of great ways that we want to be able to help you. And in some cases that may be learning from each other in, the successes and the failures along the way, and see what secret sauce each district can create that best meets their needs. Anybody else have any other thoughts they want to share?
I do. I'm Ellen Mavrich. I work with the Oberlin Schools Endowment Fund, and I personally am, kind of in charge of our social media posts, and I would love to do a much better job of that and to have a really professional focused message. So I would love to learn anything more about putting together a campaign for something like that. But I also am wondering, with respect to donations, and we do a mail campaign every year, an annual appeal campaign. And I'm wondering, is it possible for us to know how many of those donations come in the form of a check and how many of those donations come in the form of a credit card charge or donation. I'm wondering, and I'm not sure what our messaging is in the letter, if we even tell people that they can make a credit card donation, but is there a way for the community foundation to let us know how much of our donations are made via credit card versus check?
Allison, would you mind jumping in about what's covered on the portal, or Jim?
Yeah, definitely. Ellen, I can get with you after this. We can definitely pull those reports for you. We can delineate which donations are coming in via credit card versus check.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, I know myself, it's much easier to make a credit card donation, and maybe we'll learn that our donors would prefer that, and we should be focusing a little more on that. I don't know. So just trying to get the information to make a decision. So thank you, Allison.
Yep, definitely.
And just anecdotally to share, to go on that point, yes, people can go online and make that website, but I'm pretty sure it's your foundation or a couple of other ones that do around year end that has a little pre-printed form that folks have. And so I just know from processing checks, having that little distribution form to say, here's how we would like to support the foundation through general, unrestricted, or here are maybe the 6 or 8 or 10 options depending on how many funds are set up. That seems to resonate with some donors, especially maybe who are maybe not as tech savvy. That said, other folks like yourself are completely used to going online and making donations. So I think it works both ways, but it is nice when I see some of the endowments who organize that piece of where can my money go for the donor, so they really understand what their options are, because not everyone is going to understand that the school endowment can go 10 different ways if there's 10 different funds on there.
And then I would say another thing to keep in mind, and it might just be, we're happy to look at anybody's forms if they are doing those letters or having those check boxes on their documents. One of the things that we've incorporated on our materials is the ability to also check that the donation from the credit card be recurring. So rather than just a one and done gift, it might be that they're electing to do $25 a month or $50 a month or something like that. And, the beauty about that is that if you think about how many things that you have, or I'll take it personally, that I haven't canceled. I haven't been to a gym since COVID started, but yet I'm still paying for my gym membership. So, just think about those kind of elements of, ways that you can create that longevity, as you're going through offering those options, when you're making those solicitations or making those asks. So I wanted to just quickly share with everybody, we do have a couple of the schools that are participating in September's Connect to a Cause event, and that is September 16th, 2021. We have 70 different organizations that are participating in our day-long crowdfunding event. This is our second year. Last year, as our inaugural year, we had 56 nonprofits that participated, and within that day, we had raised over $148,000 for those 56 different nonprofits, and along with that had a $40,000 match provided by our board. So overall, there was over $188,000 that was distributed back to the nonprofits that participated. This got a lot of traction, not just from a fundraising perspective, but even just a marketing and awareness perspective. There was a lot of activity within the newspapers, within social media, through a lot of the social media channels. There were over 100,000 impressions of folks that looked at that. I think we had established from our numbers that roughly about 1 in 3 residents in Lorain County had some kind of awareness level or some kind of touch point about Connect to a Cause. So we're looking forward to that event coming up. Once again, keep in mind that the best practices don't necessarily have to be strictly endowment related. And May 21st, we do have our strategic planning event that is done with BVU, Business Volunteers Unlimited. And that may be a great thing. I know we had a conversation last week in our session about some folks looking at, board recruitment, board retention, different strategic planning initiatives. So, those types of activities and events are always on our website to be able to view and participate in as a school endowment, as well as just a general nonprofit endowment. And if you're not already getting our newsletter, you can register for that at our website, which is peoplewhocare.org. Any other final questions or thoughts from the group?
Ellen, thank you for your comment about social media. That will be another topic that we could add to a future conversation as we all continue to learn with our individual boards and individual committees how best to use the different tools that are out there. So thank you for bringing that up for further conversation.
Yeah, and just to also put it out there, Baldwin Wallace has a digital media program that they run. So we have a nice local resource in the area of BW. So.
Well, and the great news is our summer intern from Leadership Lorraine County is actually a second year at BW. So we'll be sure to leverage that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your participation and your time. I know your time is precious, so it's great that you were able to be here with us. You have our contact information. We'll be sharing these slides and a recording, as well as the documents Jim mentioned that we would like to have from each of the districts related to their awareness of these policies. And we should be getting those out later on this week. But thank you guys so much again, and feel free to reach out to us if there's anything more that you think of that we can do to better assist you. Take care.
Enjoy the
everybody.
weather. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Mommy, how